Hello and welcome to this lecture on Ansible inventory. Ansible can work with multiple systems in your infrastructure at the same time. In order to work with multiple servers, Ansible needs to establish connectivity to those servers. This is done using SSH for Linux and PowerShell remoting for Windows. That's what makes Ansible agentless. Agentless means that you don't need to install any additional software on the target machines to be able to work with Ansible. A simple SSH connectivity would suffice Ansible's needs. One of the major disadvantages of most other orchestration tools is that you are required to configure an agent on the target systems before you can invoke any kind of automation. Now, information about these target systems is stored in a file called as an inventory file. If you don't create a new inventory file, Ansible uses the default inventory file located at /etc/ansible/hosts. Let's take a look at a sample inventory file. The inventory file is in an INI-like format. It's simply a number of servers listed one after the other. You can also group different servers together by defining it like this. Enter the name of the group within a pair of square brackets and define the list of servers part of that group in the lines below. You can have multiple such groups defined in a single inventory file. This is so you can target a group of servers for any given Ansible playbook to configure all of them at once. Finally, you can also have a group of groups. In order to define a group of groups, follow the same pattern as group creation, except in this case you must add a colon followed by the keyword children to the parent group's name. In this case, I would like to create a group named all_servers that contains all servers in the groups mail, DB, and web. And so I define the group name all_servers within the square brackets followed by a colon and the keyword children. Let's take a deeper look into inventory files. For example, I have a list of servers named from 1 to 4. However, I would like to refer to these servers in Ansible using an alias, such as web server or database server. I could do this by adding an alias for each server at the beginning of the line and assigning the address of the server to Ansible host parameter. Ansible_host is an inventory parameter used to specify the FQDN or IP address of a server. There are other inventory parameters too. Some of the other key inventory parameters are Ansible connection, Ansible port, Ansible user, and Ansible SSH pass. Ansible connection is what defines how Ansible connects to the target server. As we discussed in the previous slide, is this a SSH connection to a Linux server or a WinRM connection to a Windows server? This is how we define if the target host we wish to connect to is a Linux or a Windows host. You could also set it to localhost to indicate that we would like to work with the local host and not connect to any remote hosts. If you don't have multiple servers to play around with, you could simply start with a local host in your inventory file. Ansible port defines which port to connect to. By default, it is set to port 22 for SSH, but if you need to change that for some reason, you can set it differently using the Ansible_port parameter. Ansible user defines the user used to make remote connections. If you need to change this, define it. If you need to change that, define it as shown here. Ansible_SSH_pass defines the SSH password for Linux. Note that storing passwords in plain text format may not be very ideal. Look up Ansible Vault to securely store your passwords in an encrypted format. Well, that's it for this lecture. go ahead to coding exercises and try to create some inventory files. We will stick to what we learned so far and create inventory files in its basic format. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this demo. We will now perform a simple test to check the connectivity between Ansible and the target machine. To check connectivity, I will first try to SSH to the target server. So the target server is at 192.168.1.114. So I will try and SSH into it. And as you can see, it first asks me to confirm the key fingerprint. I'm going to hit yes, and I will provide the password for the target host, and I'm logged in. I will now exit out of the system. Now to test the connectivity through Ansible, I'm going to create a test project. I'll create a folder called test-project. Inside that folder, I will create an inventory file. The inventory file will have one entry for the target host, which is target1. I will specify the IP address using the Ansible host attribute, and the IP address is 192.168.1.114. And then I will specify the password used to connect to the target server, which is ansible_ssh_pass and osboxes.org. Okay, now I have my inventory file with the IP of my target server and the password. I can now run the check by running the Ansible command. That's Ansible and the name of my host, which is target1. And I will specify a module called ping, which is used to run the ping test, and my inventory file with a -i parameter, inventory.txt. When I hit enter, it will perform a ping test through Ansible and make sure that it can establish a successful connectivity to my target machine. In this case, it says it's success and it comes back with a Pong message. And so that confirms that my Ansible controller can successfully communicate or connect to the target machine. We'll modify the inventory file to update it with information about the target2 system. We'll add a new line for target2. The Ansible host would be 192.168.1.115, and the password will be the same. I will now try to do a ping test through Ansible for my target2 server. I will first test target1 and it looks good. I will now try a test for target2, and as you can see, it's failed. But we followed the same steps for both the servers. We created the servers from the same clone. We followed the same steps to identify IP address and set host name. It has failed for target2, but it's passed for target1. If you read the error message, you can see that it's got something to do with the SSH login and the key. It says, please add this host fingerprint to your known host file. But did we do that for the first host? If you go back to the earlier session and look at it, you will see that we did a manual SSH from the Ansible controller system to the target1 system. And when we did that, we actually accepted the key fingerprint by confirming when we did the SSH. And so that added the key of the target server to the known host list on the Ansible controller machine. We didn't actually do that for the target2 server. So that is the reason the Ansible ping test failed. Now, there are two ways to fix that. One is we do a manual SSH from the Ansible controller machine to the target machine, and then hit yes when it asks us for the confirmation. Or two, there is a way to disable this particular host key checking using the Ansible configuration file, which is not the recommended way. However, we'll still take a look at it. If you go to the Ansible configuration file at etc ansible.cfg and search for host key in that file, you'll find that there's an entry that says host key checking, and by default it is enabled. To disable it, you must uncomment that line, and so set host key checking to false. I've now done that and saved the file, and if I do a ping test now, I can see that it returns with a Pong. Now this is not a recommended way in a production environment. In a production environment, using passwords to establish connectivity between systems is not recommended. So there's a better way to do that, and that is using SSH keys. Thank you, and that is all for this demo.